G'day. So I just did the wheel nuts on the other side of my boat trailer and they were absolute nightmare. So I'm just gonna, I thought while I'm doing this I may as well run you guys through some important stuff that most people forget about on their boat until it's too late. So I just thought I'd run through a couple of simple things that might save you trip somewhere down the line. Nothing worse than being on the side of the road with a broken boat trailer miles from anywhere. So these are just a couple of stupid things. Anyway, I'll show you this. I did the other side without even thinking, but this side I'll show you. These wheel nuts. Now, those wheel nuts are rusty. I've just sprayed these with a trusty old CRC. I'm going to give them another spray now, let them soak. On the other side, I fought and I argued with them pretty much every turn of the way. The old wheel brace was hurting. They just didn't want to unturn because they've been on here for, these have been on here for 2 years since I've had this trailer and I've never undone them, and they didn't want to come undone because they've obviously just rusted on there and didn't want to come undone. So straight away you got a flat on the side of the road and you can't even get your wheel nuts undone. So I'll try one of these ones. That one was actually okay. The ones on the other side were just terrible. This side, I had this side off not that long ago because I was looking for a new hub to suit this as a spare hub, which I'm going to show you in a minute anyway. But I had these ones off and there's a little bit of grease left on these ones, so these ones will come off. The other ones I had to literally fight them. Had to literally fight them the whole way. Like every quarter of a turn was an absolute effort to get the wheel nuts off on the other side. So if you do nothing else, at least, I don't know, once a year, undo your wheel nuts, smack a bit of grease on these threads and then whack them back on again just to keep them moving, just so if you ever do need to get them off, you can get them off. See, these ones are coming off a lot easier because I had these off a while ago. The other side has been on there for 2 years without being touched, so these ones will come off. But even these ones you can see are a little bit on the tough side, but the CRC soon smooths them out. So obviously I'm not going to pull all these right off until I got the jack underneath this trailer, but I'll pull a couple of them off. Just a disclaimer, in no way am I a mechanic. I just don't like paying people to fix stuff for me, so I'll have a bit of a go and learn as I go 9 times out of 10. Sometimes it's the best way. Sometimes you pull something apart and can't get it back together again, but let's not talk about that. So I'm just going to soak these with CRC as I go. You can never use enough of this stuff. WD-40, CRC, whatever you want to use, it's all the same deal. Anyway, I'll get the jack and I'll stick a jack under this and then I'll carry on. Well, I wish the other side was that easy. So I've stuck the jack underneath this, pull the wheel off. I can stay over there for a minute. I was just trying to spin it. One of the best things to do to check how your wheel bearings are getting on is just spin it, and if it makes a grinding noise or feels a bit wobbly, you know you got problems. But I just realised that I've got the brake on this trailer, so these wheels aren't going to spin. So what I'm going to have to do is chock the other wheel and then let the brake off so I can spin these around. You can see the brakes. The brakes are working. I know the brakes work on this because every time I use this trailer I make a point of hitting the brakes pretty hard and just making them work. If you keep these calipers moving in and out, they tend not to seize. Again, I use this trailer, as you guys no doubt aware, I use this trailer really regularly, so you know, once a week, sometimes more. But the more regularly you use it, the more things keep moving, so obviously they don't seize up. If your trailer's sitting around for 3 months at a time in the front yard, all this stuff like your brakes and all this is probably going to be way worse than what mine is. My brakes I know work because, like I say, I use it more often than not, and I also always hit my brakes a little bit harder. Luckily I live in a pretty quiet street, so I always make sure I apply the brakes a bit when I'm towing it to make sure that the piston at the front slides in and out and the brakes come on and off a few times every time I tow it. It's a pretty simple thing to do. You know if they're working or if they're not. When you hit the brakes on the car, you can feel them engage. You feel the trailer slide forward on the piston and you feel the brakes engage on the trailer, and then when you pull forward again you feel the piston pull back out. The biggest one is reversing too. If you're reversing, sometimes you'll reverse and the piston will come back on and then the wheels lock up and you can't push the trailer backwards. Good sign the wheels are, good sign that the brakes are working. If you pull forward again, they'll come back off and you're laughing. So I know my brakes are working, so I'm not too concerned about them. But what I'm going to do is chock this up so I can spin this wheel around and get a feel for what the bearings are like inside. Right, so I've let the brake off. I can see right away. Salty, that was my dog squeaking then, boy. I can see right away that the only noise I got here is just the brake pads grinding on this bit of rust around the side of the disc here. That would wear off. As you're driving, that little bit of rust will wear off pretty quick smart. But the bearings themselves aren't growling, they're not whistling, there's no real movement in there. I'm going to say the bearings are all right in here. Like, I've had this trailer for 2 years. I pulled the cap off the other one. I'm going to do this one now anyway. I pulled the cap off the other one and it looked exactly like this. Still got fresh grease on it and it doesn't look like it's had any water whatsoever in there. In the 2 years I've had it, it doesn't look like any water's made its way in and the grease still looked good. If water's been in, you can see the grease changes colour and it all looks a bit funny. This grease here still looks red and still looks fine. I don't think that any water has really got in there. One thing I did notice when I pulled the other side off was when they put this on, they didn't put very much grease in here. I don't know whether there was method in their madness. I've always thought the more grease you pack in there, the better, the less room there is for water, but I would have had that cap full of grease, but they've only used minimal grease on this, so I don't know, they're the trailer experts, maybe they know something I don't. But I packed it full of grease anyway. Like I say, the more grease you got in there, the less room there is for water ingress. So what I'm going to do is just peel this split pin out of here. Undo the nut. I'm just going to pull this bearing out and have a quick look. Don't put your stuff down in the sand. You don't want any sand whatsoever in here if you can help it. Okay, so there's my bearing. I can see that it's all still pretty tight. There's no issues with that whatsoever. Like I said, don't put it down in the sand. I'm going to put it over here on this tyre so it's up out of the sand. But what I am going to do is get my grease gun quickly and pack some more grease in there. So I got my grease gun. Get out of it, Salty. Get out of it, dog. You're dirty enough without getting grease all over you. I'm just going to squirt some grease in here. And then I'm going to push this bearing back in where it came from. Maybe sit it back in there in the grease. Your washer, I'm going to clean that up because it had a bit of sand on it. The last thing you want is any sand in here. Clean up the washer, stick the washer back on. The nut, even though that wasn't in the sand, I'm going to give it a wipe down anyway. Tighten up your wheel nut. Check for any movement, and then I'm going to just turn that back a notch, and then in with my little split pin to hold that back in. So I put my little split pin through there just to hold the wheel nut, stop that undoing. Just check again for movement. Spin, make sure everything's working fine. Everything's turning freely. Obviously that brake pad's still rubbing, but that's okay. That's no big deal. There's no movement back and forwards in the hub, which is the main thing you're checking for here. So now I'm going to fill this up with grease while I'm here. So I'm going to fill the cap with it. A couple of squirts of grease. Like I said, I'm old school from more grease is better. I don't know whether it is or it isn't. I'm not a mechanic, but I'm going with more grease is less room for water, so that's what I'm sticking with. Now that's all full of grease. Now I'm just going to smack that back on there. And then just tap that back into place. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. You've probably seen the bearing buddies that go on here that you can pump up with grease. I've had them in the past on other boats. Do they work? I don't know. Judging by these that have been on it for 2 years and in and out of the water all the time, these don't look like they've let any water in at all. So I'm running with these caps. I reckon it's probably not a bad, it must be a half decent system. The seal through here must be pretty decent if it hasn't let any water in over all of that time. So I'll put the wheel back on. Get my grease going out of the way. The wheel can go back on, and I'm happy that that bearing is all right and going to run for a bit longer. You can tell when the bearings get a bit dodgy, because they start to make a bit of a howl when you're driving. You will hear the whoop 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 in the background. If they start making that noise, it's time to change them out. So now I'm just putting a bit of squirt of grease on each one of these threads before I put the nuts on. This is just to kind of, A, makes the nuts go on easier, but B, stops these from rusting quite as badly, so you can get the nuts off next time you want to. And back on with the nuts. I'm not going to bore you with this, so I'll probably speed this up. You don't have to do these up stupid tight. They need to be tight, but they don't need to be stupid tight. You need to get them off at a later date as well if you ever need to. I always go with the theory that I'll do them up as tight as I think would my wife be able to get them off if she needed to. What I can get off and what a lady can get off on the side of the road is a different matter. But I always keep in mind that they might have to come off. Someone quite not as strong as I. With the boat trailer, it's most likely going to be me, but with the car, it could be my son or it could be my wife. Just nipped them up the last time around them, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Wheel bearing is going to run for a while. I'm happy there's no water in there. I'm happy the brakes are working on and off. It's a reasonably good tyre. I'm going to check the pressures at the end of it all. But I'm going to move on to what I really came here for. Actually, yeah, I'll do it over here. So, I just bought, what prompted all of this was the hub. I wanted a spare wheel on my trailer for several reasons. One was beach launching. I sometimes do some beach launching with this boat, and I'd like to have a spare wheel on here so you can drop it off the car, push the trailer into the water, and then use a snatch strap to pull the trailer back out so you don't have to end up putting your car in the water. So I've wanted a spare wheel on here for a while, I just haven't really got around to doing it. So I nicked down the Martin's trailer parts, bought myself a hub. This is where the problem lied. Like I told you before, I had that wheel off because I took a wheel with me to the trailer parts place. I wanted to make sure I got the right stud pattern. I needed a rim and I needed a hub, and I wanted to make sure I got the right stud pattern. So I took the wheel down. The guy at Martin's goes, "Yep, no worries, that's a Ford stud pattern." I said, "Okay, beauty, give me a hub." He goes, "Is it a Holden bearing or a Ford bearing?" I'm like, "Are you serious? It's a Ford stud pattern. Would it not be Ford bearings?" And he said, "No, it's a Ford stud pattern, but it could be Holden bearings or it could be Ford bearings." So we went backwards and forwards a few times, asked me a few questions. Anyway, the guy was smart enough to figure it out that it was a Ford bearings, luckily. So I got the stub axle with the Ford the Ford stub axle and 4 bearings in here, and it's a Ford stud pattern all the way around on this boat, so that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is mount the stub axle on here, but I'm going to have to drill some holes first. I'm not going to bore you with me drilling holes, but when I get this stub axle mounted on, I'll run through mounting this hub, which again, I'm no mechanic or expert, but I'll figure it out as we go. And then I will be able to have a spare wheel on the front, hub and bearings ready to go. If you ever need to change bearings on the side of the road, you can slide this one off, bang, slide it straight back on, providing the shells aren't cooked to the axle, which I've seen in the past, but I'd hope to get to it long before that stage. And you've got a spare, just a bit of peace of mind. And also, like I said, for beach launching, you can take it off the car, hook a snatch strap to the car, to the trailer, push the trailer in deep into the water, get the boat off and not have to get your car wet. I'm not too fussed about my car. My car's pretty old. All I do is tow to the boat ramp and back with it anyway, but the further you keep your car from the water's edge, the less likely you are to get stuck as well, so it just makes more sense. So what I'll do, I'll drill these holes and then I'll run you through mounting this hub if all goes well. Fingers crossed. Okay, so I had to move the jockey wheel back a little bit just to make some space here for the spare wheel, but I didn't bore you with the drilling. I've drilled a couple of clamps through there. I've just got to clean all this up a bit, get all that off. I've got some cold galv in the shed, so I'll give this a spray with some cold galv so it doesn't rust. I'm actually going to loosen these bolts off now. I know it fits. I'll loosen the bolts off and spray behind, give it all a good touch up with some cold galv, and I'm going to mount the bearings in this. I might mount the bearings on here first so I don't spray cold galv on here. I'll mount the bearings and grease all this up first, and then I'll pull it off and cold galv it, but I won't bother you with that. So in the meantime, I'm just going to mount the bearings on this. So first things up, it's all nice and brand new, so it should be easy enough to do. Starts with this ring. Alright, so I just packed the rear bearing, but probably maybe to show you that film now because my wife was revving up the quad bike, loading up with hay, Salty's barking at the quad bike. It was just a bit of a fiasco. But I've packed this rear bearing with grease. I've put in that rear water seal there, and then this rubber seal goes on top of there. Another smear of grease inside of that, and then that just slides on. That'll just slide onto there for now. Then I'm going to pack all in here with as much grease as I can squeeze in here. Okay, bearing number 2. So I don't know, there's a few different ways of doing this. I basically just get all the sand out of my hand first. I basically just put a heap of grease in my hand like this, which is why I wear these gloves, and then I just pack the bearing in there. Just make sure I work my way around, make sure grease gets all through that whole bearing, in all the nooks and crannies. It's not the cleanest way of doing stuff, so that gets the bearing all full of grease, packed in. Stick that in there, and then it's going to be awkward now. I'll do my nut. On with the washer. Oh, great. Everything's as slippery as crazy now. On with the washer, on with the nut, and then I'll crank that up, which will crank that back seal. That back seal should go up over that. It's all a bit new and a bit tight. What I'm going to do is get a spanner and I'll just crank that on there nice and tight. Oh, here it goes, it's sliding on now. You don't want to force anything. Just, you can see I'm doing this with my fingers now, so I'm not really forcing anything. Crank that on there, and you can see that that back seal, if I take this glove off, so don't believe I touch the GoPro with grease all over my hand. So you can see that that seal has seated in there as tight as it can. The bearing's all spinning nice and smoothly. I might just give that a little, I'll give this a little nip with the spanner just to make sure all the bearings are seated in there nice and tight, and then I'll put the split pin through and fill it up. I'm not worried about this one being super tight because this one's a spare anyway, and I want it to come on and off nice and easily if I ever need to change it over. But that should be beautiful for the purpose that I was hoping it was going to work for. Split ring through the nut there to make sure it doesn't come undone too easily. I haven't really folded this too hard because, like I said, if I want to get it off, it's probably going to be on the side of the road trying to fix one of the other bearings, so I want it to come off nice and easy. So I'm not going to fold these right over and make them a pain in the ass to get back off. That's fine as long as it's not rubbing on that, because don't forget that spins with the hub. In this application it's probably not going to be super important anyway, but if it was actually on the wheel and that's spinning around on that, it's probably going to wear away on it and maybe cut a hole through this. But in this application, not going to happen. So I'm just going to fill this full of grease, tap that on there, and then mount the tyre. When the tyre's on, I'm going to assess where this jockey wheel can sit. I've still got this nice and loose so I can slide it along back and forwards and just see where it's going to sit, so that I'm not going to bang my hand on the tyre when I'm winding it up or down. So I'll fill this up with some grease, tap this on, then I'm going to clean my hand. I thought about it and I decided not to fill this with grease. I put 2 squirts in. I'm not going to fill it with grease because, once again, I want this to be easy to come on and off, and I don't want to have to fight with a mountain of grease if I'm on the side of the road with a busted wheel bearing. I want this to just be a nice and smooth operation. So you just tap that on there. Just gentle taps around the outside to get it on there nice and evenly. And there we go. Spare hub mounted. Now the spare wheel, I didn't get a galvanised one. They didn't actually have any galvanised ones, and I really wanted a spare wheel for this weekend, so I just got a painted one for now. I'll probably get a galv one later on. They're cheap enough to buy. I had a tyre already which I just fitted on here. I'm not going to run you through fitting tyres, that's another story altogether. Another bunch of headaches. I don't know if this wheel's going to go on there the right way around. It might do, but a lot of the times they don't. Oh, this one actually does. Sometimes they won't go on the right way, they'll actually rub on the trailer, but this one sits far enough out that I can do it, which is a bonus. Again, another little smear of grease on each one of these nuts. On each one of these studs before I put the nuts on. These, I don't want these to be stupid tight. There's no way to stop this wheel from spinning, short of dropping it on the ground. There's no way to stop this wheel from spinning, so it's pretty hard to lean on them to tighten them or loosen them anyway. So I'm just going to put these on and just nip them up the best I can with a wheel brace. But these don't need to be crazy tight. There's no real pressure on this. Anyway, I'm not going to bore you with spinning on 5 different wheel studs and tighten them up. There you go, spare wheel on a bearing on the trailer. I've got those bearings repacked with grease. I've just got to check my tyre pressures. I know my brakes are working. I'm sorted. I've got a spare tyre, I've got a spare bearing.